Hello and welcome to the Exam 2 Review and Practice Problems video. In this video, I will go over the content of the exam, try to give you some ideas about studying, and I will be going through each of the different math or computational type problems that you will end up seeing on the exam. So first, let's go through the exam review and format. So there is a review document, just like Exam 1, there's a review document on Blackboard available for you. It will detail everything there is, everything you need to know about the exam. The exam format is very similar to the previous exam, 34 multiple choice questions, 3 points each. So that's a maximum exam score of 102 points. That's like you getting 2 bonus points on the exam because this is a 100-point scale, and it is possible to actually get a 102 on the exam. So there will be 13 questions that are computational. That's math-based questions. And just so that you remember all of the different math-based questions, your professor has gone over examples in class. There are many example practice problems available for you on Blackboard. And then today in this video, I'm going to be going over each of those different types of computational questions, and all of these are structured very similar to what you will end up seeing on the exam. So I'm going to strongly suggest that you practice working out those math type problems so that you feel very confident with them. There are also 21 conceptual problems or conceptual questions, multiple choice on the exam. These will be covering definitions of key supply chain terms, concepts that we covered, principles, ideas, and lists of concepts that are related in there. And so all of these questions come from your class time with your professor. They will include questions related directly to the PowerPoint slides for each of the presentations that your professor gave, as well as information that your professor was giving you during class. The textbook, just like the previous exam, the textbook should be used for support material, but keep in mind that there are lots of concepts in the textbook, lots of techniques that are in the textbook that are covered in there that we are not covering on the exam. So take a close look at the review sheet, because the review sheet will tell you exactly what is covered on the exam and what is not covered on the exam. So if you turn to page 2 of the exam review sheet, that's where it begins, and you can see that it goes through each of the different chapters, sections of the textbook, and walks you through what sections of the textbook are covered, what sections of the textbook are not covered, and then what class content was covered that wasn't covered in the textbook, or that is not covered in the textbook. And so it's going to tell you exactly what you need to know for that exam. Now, one of the questions that students often ask about this particular exam is they mentioned that this exam covers a lot of material. They note that it covers several different chapters, and that seems overwhelming. Again, please take a look at the second, third pages of the exam review sheet, where it details exactly what is on the exam and what is not on the exam. It turns out that we aren't covering the entirety of all of those chapters that are listed in the textbook. In fact, for some of those chapters, it's just a couple of key concepts out of the chapter. So it's not like you have to memorize the information from all of those different chapters. It's just the key information that we discussed in our class time together. Just like the previous exams, this exam is closed book, closed notes. The sections of the book and the course content that is being tested is listed on the exam review sheet. We'll go through that in a few minutes, and so you should have those available. Any content that you need from Blackboard, so that would be class slides, PowerPoint slides, practice problems, any other resources that are on Blackboard that you would like available offline while you study for the exam, you need to download those now so that you have those available. Download them onto your computer, onto a USB drive. The Blackboard content will be removed and disabled prior to and during the exam testing sessions. This is to provide some consistency and some equity among the testing conditions for all of the different students. It also gives us a little bit of control over academic honesty issues. Additionally, the assistants and instructors will not be available to answer questions once the exam has begun. This is one way that we're able to establish some equity among all of the different students. So if you have questions about your studying, about the material, about practice problems, or would like some help with that, make sure that you see the assistants or your instructor sometime prior to when the exam sessions begin. Also, because most of Blackboard functionality will be disabled during that exam testing session, make sure that you can log into MyOMLab by going directly to the Pearson website. So I've provided that link here, and I'll have a slide coming up in a minute that will give you some instructions about how to log on there. You want to practice logging on directly through the MyOMLab site now, so that you can confidently do that during the testing session. Please note that exam grades will be posted on Blackboard only after all students have taken the exam. So once you complete the exam, you'll click that you save all of your answers. It will submit your exam at that point, but your grade will not be available until all the students have taken the exam, which will probably be sometime the following week. Here are the instructions and some advice for logging into MyOMLab when it is not available with the direct link through Blackboard. Now, for the first exam review, I spent an extended period of time talking with you on this video about how to do well on these exams. Some tips, some strategies, tools for being able to do really well on these exams. Many of you have taken my advice already and did very well on the first exam. If that's not you and you would like to get that advice again, maybe you just need a refresher, or maybe you didn't get it the first time and you would like to hear a discussion about how to do really well on these exams, what I have done is at the end of this video presentation, I will tack on the full discussion about how to do well on this exam. And so feel free to stick around after I finish all of the review today, and then I'll go into much more detail about these slides to give you advice for how to do especially well on this coming exam. Here's the first problem type that we covered for this section of the course. It's using the company's annual financial information to calculate some key data regarding their supply chain capabilities. Now recall that for these particular calculations, we do not have formulas that you're going to be given on the exam. And the reason for that is that all of you are business students, and these are general business type calculations that you should not need formulas for. These are things that regardless of your major, you should understand how to calculate. Now, we talked about in class that many times values that show up on the company's financials are calculated as a percentage of their revenues. And so you're being asked here for two pieces of information. This is very similar to how an exam problem might be laid out. You're given sales revenue, cost of goods sold, which is COGS, the COGS number there, and pre-tax earnings, and you're asked to find the percent cost of goods sold and the pre-tax profit margin, which is also a percentage. So my advice to you for watching this video is that when I prompt you, or when you have the opportunities, pause the video, see if you can figure out on your own the next steps of the calculations, and then I will walk through that with you. So for these two calculations, we are using the overall sales revenue in our percent calculations. We're finding out what percent of our overall revenue is made up of whatever the category is that we're looking for. So for this first one, it's percent cost of goods sold. So we take our cost of goods sold, the money there that is related directly to our purchases of material that the procurement function in an organization in their supply chain would have, divided by the total sales. So you can see the calculations here. Remember, you may want to try this if you haven't done it already. Take those numbers there and type them into your calculator. Take 8530 divided by 14100 and see what you get. You're going to get a decimal number. So you'll get 0.60496. Remember that to convert that into a percentage, you'll need to move the decimal place over to places or multiply by 100. Either way will work. And so we see here that our cost of goods sold is 60.496%. Pre-tax profit margin is calculated very similarly. We take our pre-tax earnings, our pre-tax profit there, 700 million, and divide it by the total sales revenue, and we find that our pre-tax profit margin for this particular company is 4.965%. Next, we're being asked the same numbers here, and we're being asked that if purchasing or procurement reduces the cost of goods sold by $30 million, finds ways of doing the purchasing, procurement, finding different suppliers where we're able to maintain the quality, delivery, the different characteristics that we're looking for in those goods or services, but it's just that we're able to reduce the cost by $30 million, then how will that affect the pre-tax earnings? What will the new pre-tax earnings be? I'm going to let you pause the video and try to get this yourself, and then I'll walk you through the logic of how we actually calculate this. So remember that in supply chain, when we are able to find better ways of accomplishing tasks, better ways of configuring the organization to be able to meet customers' needs, and we do it for less money, then the savings that we get from those improvements that we make, in this case of purchasing or procurement improvement, those savings go directly to the bottom line. It's as if we walk into our manager's office and we say, we just made the company this much more in profits because we saved money. So if purchasing or procurement reduces the cost of goods sold by 30 million, that 30 million will go straight to the bottom line. It will go straight to the profits of the company. And so we just add the savings to our old pre-tax earnings, and we get that our new pre-tax earnings will be $730 million. So now we're using the same base numbers for the company annual financials, and we're asked if purchasing or procurement reduces the cost of goods sold by only 1%. What are the new pre-tax earnings? Now keep in mind, this is exactly the same question that we were just asked. It's that this time, instead of being given cost of goods sold in terms of dollars, we're asked for the cost of goods sold reduction in terms of a percent. So there's an extra calculation that we have to do here. Why don't you pause the video and see if you can do this one on your own. So first we have to calculate what the savings are that the purchasing and procurement area was able to acquire. So how much did they actually save? Well, they saved 1% of the cost of goods sold. So we take the cost of goods sold, 8530, and multiply it by 0.01, which is the decimal format for a percentage, and we get that they saved $85.3 million. Then we're able to take that number and calculate our new pre-tax earnings. So doing the calculation just as we did before, our new pre-tax earnings are 700 million plus the amount that purchasing or procurement saved, which comes out to $785.3 million for our new pre-tax earnings. Next, we are asked to actually calculate the profit leverage effect of savings that are done in the supply chain. So these are all the same numbers that we had before, and now we're asked if purchasing or procurement was able to reduce the cost of goods sold by $50 million, which in effect raises our profits by $50 million. It's asking how much would sales or marketing need to increase sales to have the same effect. So what we're asking is, how much would sales and marketing need to increase the revenue in order to get a jump of $50 million in terms of profit, just like purchasing and procurement did by reducing cost of goods sold by $50 million. So this is a calculation we did in class. There will be no formula given on the exam. So this is one that you're going to have to memorize. Let's see if you can remember how to do it. Why don't you pause the video and see if you can figure this one out. So profit leverage effect will be equal to the savings that was done by the supply chain divided by the profit margin. And in class, we showed you some examples about why this is. You don't have to know necessarily why it is on the exam, but you do need to know that the profit leverage effect is the savings that's done by supply chain divided by the profit margin. And so we see here that that profit leverage effect is 1,007 million, or basically a little over $1 billion. So what that means is that sales or marketing would need to increase sales by over $1 billion in order to get a $50 million increase in the company profits. Purchasing and procurement is able to do that by reducing cost of goods sold by less than 1%, just by reducing cost of goods sold by $50 million. The next type of calculation that we did was total cost calculations. And we did this when we were purchasing products. We wanted to find out what the total cost would be over the lifetime of that particular product. And as we mentioned in class, the calculations in the textbook can get fairly complex. So we're going to stick with the level of complexity that we dealt with in class and in the practice problems, and it's represented here in these problems. Now, again, there's no formulas for these because really the only thing you do is you're going to be given several categories of cost that's associated with purchasing a material or producing a particular material or a product. And all you need to do is for each category of cost, you calculate the cost per product. So many times we are going to be producing many products, and we just need to figure out what the cost for each product is. Once we find each of those costs for each of the categories of cost, then we just add them together. So we're looking for units of dollars per product or dollars per part when we're doing these calculations. All right. Well, so here is the big problem statement. I'm going to allow you to pause the video and look through this and see if you can calculate the total cost per product. Then I'll come back with you and I'll walk through it step by step. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to break this problem up into each of the different costs. We're given a direct material cost in this problem. We are given a one-time machine purchase. We're given some incremental direct cost, and we're going to calculate all of those costs as cost per product. Then all we'll do is add them up at the end. So let's take a look at the first one. The problem statement mentions that the direct material cost is $5.75 per product. So we're going to be purchasing the raw materials at a cost of $5.75 for every product that we produce. And that just is the direct cost. There's really no calculation needed there. The direct material cost just is $5.75. Next is the one-time machine purchase cost. Now this is a cost that we are going to incur at the beginning of this project where we will purchase the CNC machine, and apparently this one costs $5,000, and then we will produce all of the products that we need to produce on that machine. So what we do is take the total number of products that we plan on producing on that machine and divide up the cost per product. So here it's going to be $5,000 for the cost of the machine divided by 100,000 products that we plan on making. That's 2,000 products per week for 50 weeks. If you take 50 times 2,000, you get 100,000. So that gives us a cost of 5 cents per product. And finally, the incremental direct cost per product. So here it states that every time we produce 2,000 products, and so this will be once every week, the company has to stop production to replace a cooling fluid filter that costs $500. That's a pretty expensive filter. So what we do is we take that filter is good for 2,000 products. So the cost of that filter gets divided among all of the 2,000 products that get made using that filter. So here, $500 divided by the 2,000 products that are allocated for that filter gives us a incremental direct cost of 25 cents or $0.25. After we have each of these costs calculated out, then calculating the total cost per product is very easy. We just add them together. So here $5.75 plus 5 cents plus 25 cents gives us $6.05 per product. That is our total cost per product. Okay, next problem type is the total weighted point evaluation system, and we do have formulas for that. And so here is the screenshot of the formulas that you will be seeing on the exam for questions just like this. And this would be something very similar to what you might see on the exam. So we have several things that we're evaluating a company on: safety, sustainability, quality, delivery, cost for a particular supplier. We have 2 suppliers. We are ranking or rating those 2 suppliers where higher numbers are better. Big numbers are better, smaller numbers are worse. And then the weights are there. The weights are importance. Now the first question that we need to answer is this a valid point evaluation system? And so there is an answer to that, and the answer comes from adding the weights. So for a valid weighted point evaluation system, the sum of the weights has to be equal to 1. So if you take 0.29 plus 0.27 plus 0.19 plus 0.13 plus 0.12, you find that that equals 1. And so this is a valid evaluation system to use, a valid weighting system to use. So now this is very similar to the value calculation that we did early in the course, and so you should be able to do this. You got the formula right here. So why don't you pause the video and see if you can calculate the performance of supplier A and supplier B, and then select the supplier that you feel that, based upon those numbers, that which supplier we should select. So to calculate performance in a different category, we just multiply the weight by the performance for that particular supplier. So here, 0.29 times 7 is 2.03. That is our performance for supplier A. For supplier B, the calculation is similar: 0.29, the weight, times the performance, which is 1, equals 0.29. Now let's do the rest of these. So for sustainability, 3 times 0.27 gives us 0.81 for the performance for supplier A, and 10 times 0.27 gives us 2.7 as the performance for supplier B. So we continue with that pattern of calculations to get the performance of supplier A and B for quality, delivery, and cost, and you can see the numbers here. All of those numbers come from just multiplying the weight by their current performance score, a scale of 1 to 10, and then that gives us their performance in terms of a normalized scale. Now to calculate the overall performance for supplier A and supplier B, we just add their performance numbers for safety, sustainability, quality, delivery, and cost. So just adding that column of numbers gives us supplier A has a score of 6.37, supplier B has a score of 5.64. That is on a scale of 1 to 10, and in this case, higher is better, so supplier A will be our preferred supplier. Okay, now we're going to do projected ending inventory calculations. Here's another set where you will be given formulas, and there is the formula for ending inventory, and that is the same screenshot that you will be seeing on the exam. Problems could be set up very similar to this one, where you're given a matrix with weeks of data, forecasted demand, booked orders, a production schedule, and some ending inventory at the end of one of those periods, some actual inventory, and you're asked to calculate ending inventory for one of these other periods. We're going to calculate ending inventory for all of these other periods, periods 17 through 21. In this case, it's weeks. So let's take a look. Why don't you pause the video and see if you can use the formula to calculate the projected ending inventory, and then I will show you these calculations. So we'll have to calculate this sequentially. So first we look at week 17. So in week 17, the ending inventory for week 17, and I'm just reading from the formula here, is the ending inventory for the previous week, which is 50, plus the master production schedule quantity, which is 100, minus the maximum of either the booked orders or the forecasted demand. And in this case, the booked orders is the larger quantity, so that's the number we subtract. So the quantity we get for projected ending inventory is 50 plus 100 minus 95. Let's go to period 18. So this calculation is similar. In week 18, we are trying to find the projected ending inventory, and that is equal to the ending inventory from the previous week, so 55, plus the master production schedule for the week that we're in, so that's 200, minus the maximum of either the forecasted demand or the booked orders. In this case, the booked orders is greater than the forecasted demand, so that's the number we will use. 55 plus 200 minus 100 gives us a projected ending inventory of 155. Next for week 19. So in week 19, we take the ending inventory for the previous week, that's 155, plus the amount that we have scheduled in the master production schedule, which is 0 for this particular week, minus the maximum of either the forecasted demand or the booked orders. In this case, the forecasted demand is bigger than the booked orders, so that's the number that we will use. So the ending inventory in week 19 is 155 plus 0 minus 120. It gives us 35. Now week 20. The calculation is done the exact same way. We take the ending inventory from the previous week, 35, plus the master production schedule quantity, 100, minus the maximum of either the forecasted demand or the booked orders. In this case, the forecasted demand is larger than the booked orders, so we will use the number 140 there. So the calculation is 35 plus 100 minus 140 gives us a negative 5. And that is not an incorrect answer. That is the correct answer for the projected ending inventory. We do have a projected ending inventory of minus 5, which indicates that we are planning to run out, to actually be overdrawn and to be backlogged by orders. And this is just an indication that there is an issue that the supply chain group is going to have to deal with. And so this is one way that we're able to problem solve in our organizations. So minus 5 in this case is the correct answer. For the final week, week 21, we take the ending inventory from the previous week, which is minus 5, negative 5, plus the master production schedule of 100, minus the maximum of either the forecasted demand or the booked orders. In this case, the maximum between those two is the forecasted demand at 160. So we take negative 5 plus 100 minus 160 gives us a negative 65. So it looks like in 5 weeks, we are going to be running into potentially some serious problems. And so that is something that the supply chain group will need to look at and begin to problem solve. The next calculation type that we had for this part of the course is the available to promise calculation. And remember, there are actually 2 different formulas for this, depending on if you're in that very first week or if you're in subsequent weeks. And so we are going to go through this step by step so that you can see where all of these numbers come from. Again, we're calculating the available to promise for each of these weeks. On the exam, you would be given similar data to this, but you would be asked to calculate the available to promise for one of the particular weeks that's in there, and that would be the multiple choice question. So I'm going to give you a chance to pause the video, try to do this on your own, and then I will walk through it slowly along with you so that you can follow along. So remember, in the first week, we are going to use the formula that you see there on the left-hand side under where it says first week ATP. After this first week, we will use the formula that's on the right. Notice that on the left, the formula on the left is actually exactly the same as the formula on the right, except that for that first week, we are going to include the ending inventory from the previous week. Now, the reason for that is that this is 50 units that we actually have on the shelf. So this is 50 units that we can sell, that we can talk to sales and get them to go out and sell. And so that 50 needs to be included. That is available for us to sell, available for us to promise to customers. So the way this first week happens is that we will take the ending inventory from the previous week, which is 50, plus whatever we have scheduled to produce. So the master production schedule here is 100, minus all of the booked orders until we begin to produce again. And you can see, look in week 18, see how we're producing in week 18. The master production schedule has us producing 200 more in week 18. So next week we'll get more inventory. Next week we'll be producing more. And so all we have to do is worry about the booked orders from this week. So the way this calculation goes, it'll be 50 plus 100 minus 95. So now we are in week 18, and now in week 18 we will use the subsequent week's ATP formula, the one that's over there on the right. Notice that that formula does not include any ending inventory numbers in it. Now the reason for that is, notice in the previous week, in week 17, we had 55 that were available to promise. When we have those available to promise, the assumption behind this formula is that sales will go out, if they're available, sales will go out and actually sell those 55 units. And so if sales sells the 55 units, then our actual inventory will be zero. We will have zero inventory, and we're sort of starting from scratch. So then in week 18, we start out with zero, and week 18 available to promise will be our master production schedule, the amount that we have to schedule for that week, which is 200, minus the sum of all of the booked orders until we begin producing again. Now take a look here. In week 18, we'll produce 200, and we have booked orders of 100 for that week. Notice that in the following week, in week 19, we aren't planning to produce any. The production is zero. And so any booked orders in week 19, we have to use the material that we made in week 18 to cover those orders. And so that's why it's the sum of all of the booked orders until we produce again. And you can see that we're going to be producing again in week 20. So in this case, looking at the formula, the available to promise will be equal to the master production schedule for this week, which is 200, minus the sum of the booked orders until we produce again, which is the booked orders for week 18, where we are producing, the booked orders for week 19, when we are not producing, and then in week 20 we begin producing again, so we don't have to worry about those booked orders quite yet. So it is 200, the master production schedule, minus 100, minus another 100 on those booked orders, which gives us available to promise of 0. Now, whenever you are not producing, so when the master production schedule is 0, you will not have an available to promise. Remember, the assumption behind the formula is that in week 18, whatever we had available to promise, which in this case was 0, but if it had been a number there, whatever we had available to promise, sales would end up selling. And because we are not producing anymore in week 19, we will not have any available to promise in week 19. So let's look now at week 20. In week 20, we will take the master production schedule for week 20, which is 100, and subtract all of the booked orders until we produce again. And we will be producing again in week 21, so we only have to worry about the booked orders for week 20. So 100 minus 90 gives us available to promise of 10. And finally, in week 21, the master production schedule for week 21 is 100 minus the booked orders there in week 21, which is 20, gives us an available to promise of 80. Now we'll do a couple of simplified MRP calculations. The formulas will be given to you. Here is the screenshot of the formulas that will be given to you on the exam. It'll look very similar to this, where you will be given a problem statement and the formula will show up right next to the problem. In this case, we are calculating how many of each product that we should include on future planned production orders. So how many more products we should plan to produce. Why don't you pause the video and see if you can calculate these using the formulas that you see here. So in this case, we're just going to follow the formula, following the formula for planned production orders that's up there at the top. It's going to be, first one's going to be the maximum of either 0 or the sum of these values. It's going to be the forecast for finished goods. For product A, that's 155 that we're forecasting, minus our current finished goods inventory, which in our case is 90, minus the planned production orders that we already have in place, which for product A is 70. So 155 minus 90 minus 70 is minus 5, which means we do not need any additional planned production orders. We're already going to have more than we need. For product B, it's going to be 270 products that we have forecasted, minus 140 that we have in finished goods, minus 70 that we have scheduled to be produced, which gives us a remaining 60. So we need another 60 to be produced. We need to create planned production orders for an additional 60. So the next calculation is calculating new purchase orders for materials. So what we're trying to find out is how many products we need to be making, how many materials we currently have in place, and then how many more materials or how many more products worth of materials we need to purchase from our suppliers for these to be able to fill future orders. And so there's a calculation here that is in the formula box. You can take a look at that. Why don't you pause the video and see if you can calculate this for yourself. So let's calculate this using the formula that is there in the box. So the new purchase orders that we should place with suppliers will be the maximum of either 0 or this sum. The planned production orders that we currently have in place, and for product C, that's 65, minus the raw materials that we currently have available for product C, in that case it's 15, minus purchase orders that we already have with our suppliers that are on the way. We've ordered these and they are being delivered. They just haven't arrived yet, and that is for 65. And so you can see here 65 minus 15 minus 65 gives us negative 15. So we do not need any new purchase orders for materials for product C. In fact, we're already going to have too many. For product D, we take 100, that's our planned production orders that we need to produce. We have enough materials for 15 of these, and we have orders with suppliers for 55 products worth of materials with our suppliers. So 100 minus 55 minus 15 gives us 30. We need new purchase orders for materials to build 30 more product Ds. Next, we have productivity and efficiency calculations, and you'll be given the formulas that are here in the box that's shown on this slide. So I've given you several different scenarios, a few different questions that's asked here. These would be similar to exam questions on the exam. This would represent, for instance, 3 or 4 different exam questions on the exam, but we'll go through each one of these separately. Why don't you pause the video, see if you can calculate these for yourself, and then I will walk you through them. Okay, the first step in calculating these is getting our units to be consistent. So, for example, if we are being asked for the worker's productivity in terms of hours, then we need to calculate all of the time elements in terms of hours. We are given that the worker works a 2-hour, 15-minute shift. we need to convert that to just hours. And so you can see the calculation here, and we find out that that is equivalent to 2.25 hours. The worker can make 50 sundaes in the 2.25 hours, so our productivity is 50 sundaes divided by 2.25 hours gives us 22.222 sundaes per hour. Next, we're going to calculate this same productivity measure in terms of minutes. So we will need to convert 2 hours 15 minutes into minutes. And here's how that is done. 2 hours times 60 minutes is 120 minutes, plus 15 additional minutes gives us 135 minutes. And we calculate then the productivity the same way. It's the output, the number of ice cream sundaes, divided by our inputs, which in this case is the time. So the productivity is 50 sundaes divided by 135 minutes, or 0.3704 sundaes per minute. Next, let's take a look at efficiency. Now, when I'm calculating efficiency problems, I like to get an indication of what my answer is going to be before I start on the calculation. So let's do that. Here's the problem statement. We have a manager who believes that a worker should be able to make 50 ice cream sundaes within 2 hours, in less than 2 hours. That's what the manager believes. And it's asking, what is the worker's efficiency based upon that manager's belief? Now, the current worker works a 2 hour and 15-minute shift and makes 50 ice cream sundaes. So they make 50 ice cream sundaes in over 2 hours, in 2 hours 15 minutes. The manager believes that the worker should be able to make 50 ice cream sundaes within 2 hours, so a shorter amount of time. So because of that, the worker is less efficient than the manager believes that they should be. So this represents a reduction in efficiency. Their efficiency is less than 100%. Their efficiency is less than what the manager believes. So when we calculate the efficiency for this first problem, we should find the efficiency calculation to give us a percentage that is less than 100%. Now, a different case is the next question that you see there, where they're asking what's the efficiency of a worker who makes 50 ice cream sundaes in 1.5 hours. That worker is faster than the manager believes that a worker should be able to work. And so their efficiency will be greater than 100% because they are able to produce at greater than the speed or greater than the performance that the manager believes is reasonable. So now let's take a look at our calculations and see if they match up. Now remember, for these calculations, it's often useful for us to divide the actual productivity of a worker divided by the standard productivity for a worker. So that's what we're going to do here. We're first going to calculate the standard productivity. Standard productivity is the productivity that the manager believes the worker should be working at. So that's 50 sundaes in 2 hours, gives us 25 sundaes per hour. That will be our standard output. Then we're able to calculate the efficiency as the actual output, or 22.222 sundaes per hour. We calculated that in the first problem up above, divided by the standard, which is 25 sundaes per hour. Gives us 88.88% efficiency, and we can be confident that that should be correct because it is an efficiency that is less than 100%, because the student worker in the problem above is working slower than or less efficient than the manager believes that they should be. Now let's calculate the next one. So in this problem, the efficiency of this worker is 50 tasks or 50 sundaes in 1.5 hours, gives us 33.333 tasks or sundaes per hour. That will be our actual productivity or our actual output. We're going to divide that by the standard, which is what the manager believes, which is 25 sundaes per hour. We just calculated that in the problem just above. So our efficiency is our actual for this particular worker, which is 33.333, tasks or Sundays per hour divided by 25, which is our standard, gives us 133.33% efficiency. And this seems reasonable because this worker is working faster or more efficient than the manager believes that they could be. Now let's do some project management calculations. Now on these problems on the exam, they will be a multiple choice format. You will be given data that is similar to this, and then you will be asked to do certain things with the data. Now obviously the calculations that we are going to be doing today on this video, the total number of calculations that we're doing here is more complex than we could ask in one multiple choice question on the exam. But as long as you can solve this problem that we're doing here and the practice problems that are available to you on Blackboard, then you will be able to accomplish any of the things that we're asking for on the exam. So I guess let's start with this. Here is the network, giving you a variety of activities, durations, and predecessors. The very first task that you need to be able to do is draw the activity on node network diagram for this project. So I want you to pause the video. I want you to try to draw it for yourself. Then we'll come back and I will draw it for you. Now on the exam, what's going to happen is you will be given several different diagrams and you will have to select the one that represents this particular project. The best way to do these problems is to just draw out the network diagram yourself and then match it up with the ones that are presented to you in the multiple choice format. So take a pause on the video and work on creating this project management network diagram, and then I'll come back and I will draw it along with you. Okay, let's get started. So the project needs to get started at some point. The only tasks that can be completed at the beginning of a project are ones that don't have any predecessors, which means these are tasks that you don't have to complete anything prior to completing them. So they can be done first. So in the chart of tasks that I have on the lower right, for all of these problems, you will just look for all of the activities or all of the tasks that have no predecessors. In this case, we only have one, and it is activity A. There are other network diagrams, and you can find plenty of examples in the practice problem section where there would be multiple activities that have no predecessor, and they all are the beginning of a project. So at the beginning, you could do any of those tasks. But for this one, it's just task A. The convention that we're using is drawing a circle, putting A in the circle to label it, and also the duration. In this case, the duration is 1, which might be 1 day or 1 week for the project. So next we look in the chart for any tasks that have A as a predecessor. And what this means is that after task A is complete, then these tasks may be started. And in this case, there are 3 tasks that we can start after we finish task A. They aren't necessarily connected with one another, so we list them separately: task B, task C, and task D. Now let's look at task B. After completing task E, we can complete task E, because task E has B as one of its predecessors. After we complete task C and D, then we can complete task F. And you can see in the chart, F has 2 predecessors, which means F must wait until task C and task D are completed before it can be started. Next, task G requires task E and F to be completed, so we draw task G. Task H only has one predecessor, and that's task D. So after task D is completed, task H can be started. Finally, task I has 2 predecessors. Task I can only be started after task G and task H are complete. So we draw it like this. The project is complete once all of the tasks in the project have been completed. So we draw the finish at the very end of the project after all of the tasks have been completed. In this case, it's task I, which is the last task to be completed. Next, we are going to calculate the early start and early finish times for each of the activities or each of the tasks in this project. And that will begin to fill out this matrix that I have on the lower right of the slide that you see here. We do this with a forward pass, and so I'm going to give you some time to work on doing that on your own. So you work out the forward pass, and then I'll come back and I'll calculate this together with you. As you recall, in project management, we're going to start at time 0. So the earliest our first tasks can be started is at time 0, and it will take whatever the duration is to complete that task. So in this case, for activity A, we start at time 0. It should be completed by time 1, which might be 1 week or 1 day or 1 month into the project, whatever those units of measure represent. So we have an early start of 0, early finish of 1. And as you recall, when we're doing the forward pass, we are always adding the duration of the tasks as we go along. As we can see in the diagram, after task A is completed, then task B, C, and D can be started. So looking at task B can be started once task A is complete. So the early finish of task A becomes the early start for task B. Then we add task B, or activity B's, duration of 4, and we get an early finish for task B of a time of 5. Let's repeat these calculations for tasks C and D. Task C can also be started at time equals to 1. It has a duration of 3, so it can be finished at time 4. Similarly, task D can also be started at time 1 after task A is complete. Task D has a duration of 7, and so the earliest task D can be finished is at time equals to 8. Task E only has one predecessor, and that is task B. So task E can be started once task B is complete. The earliest task B can be completed is at time equals to 5. So at that point, task E can be started. Task E has a duration of 6, and so the earliest task E will be finished is at time 11. That's 5 plus 6 equals 11. Now, task F is a little more complicated because task F has 2 predecessors. So task F may not be started until task C and task D are both complete. And so task F has to wait until both C and D are complete. So when we are doing our forward passes and we have a choice to make between 2 activities to determine what the early start will be, we always pick the one that lasts the longest, or the one that has the latest early finish time. In this case, it's task D. Task D finishes at time equals to 8. So that's the earliest that we can start task F. Task F lasts for 2, and so the earliest task F can be finished is at time 10. We'll do the same thing here for task G. So you can see here task G can only be started once task E and task F are finished. Now the earliest task F can finish is time 10. The earliest time task E can be finished is time 11. And so the earliest that task G can be started is at time 11 when task E is complete. So 11 plus 7 is 18. 18 is the earliest time that task G can be finished. Now task H. Activity H only has one predecessor, so that's the only one we need to worry about. That's task D. Task D finishes at time equals 8, so task H can begin at time 8, and then 8 plus 9 is 17, so the earliest that task H can be completed is at time 17. Finally, task I has 2 predecessors, so we must look at both. Task I can only be started once task G and task H are finished. Now task H finishes at time 17, task G finishes at time 18, and so task G is kind of the limiting activity here. Activity G finishes later, so task I can only be started once task G is finished. So task I will begin at time 18. It lasts for 4, and so it will finish at time 22. All right, so we find that the earliest time that this project can be completed is at time 22. 22 days, 22 weeks, whatever the unit of time is for the durations of these particular tasks. And now we are going to calculate the backward pass to determine the late starts and late finishes, which just mean what are the latest times that the different steps or different activities in the project can be completed and still be able to finish the project on time, which in this case on time just means as quickly as we can, which will be 22. So the earliest we should be able to finish is 22, and we don't want to go longer than that. So we're going to do a backward pass. Remember, when we are going backwards, we are going to be subtracting. I'll give you some time to complete the backward pass, so pause the video, see if you can calculate the backward pass, and then I'll come back and calculate it along with you. So let's start the backward pass. Now, the earliest time we can finish the project is time 22. That's also going to be the latest that we are going to want to finish the project. So our late finish is 22, and then we start subtracting. 22 minus 4 equals 18. The latest we can start task I is at time 18 and still finish the project on time. So now we know that task H and also task G must be finished. The latest they can finish is by the latest start time of task I, because you can see that these arrows go into task I. So if we're looking at task H, the latest task H can finish is at time 18. 18 minus 9 is 9, so the latest task H can start will be 9. Same calculation for task G. The latest that task G can finish is at the late start time of task I. So we take the 18 from task I, that becomes the late finish for task G. 18 minus 7 is 11, so 11 is the latest we can start task G. Now task F must be finished in time to be able to start task G on time. So the latest task G can be started is time 11. So the latest task F can be finished is time 11. Here then, 11 minus 2 is 9. So 9 is the late start time for task F. Task E must also be completed in time to start task G. Task G's late start time is 11, so task E's late finish time must be 11. 11 minus 6 is 5. Now task D must be finished in time to start both task F and task H. And where I get that from is by looking at the diagram. So once task D is completed, we can begin task F and task H. So task D has to be finished in time to start both of those. Now it just so happens that both of those tasks have a late start time of 9. And so that must be the late finish time for task D. 9 minus 7 is 2, so 2 is the late start time for task D. Task C must be completed in time to start task F, and so task F has a late start time of 9, and so that becomes the late finish time of task C. 9 minus 3 is 6, so 6 is the late start time for task C. Task B must be completed in time to start task E. Task E, the latest it can start is time 5, and so task B must be finished by time 5. 5 minus 4 is 1. 1 is then the late start time for task B. Now task A must be completed before task B, task C, and task D can be started. And so task E has to be complete in time to start task B, C, and D all on time. So we're going to look at the late start times for task B, C, and D. Now task D doesn't have to be started until time 2. Task C doesn't have to be started until time 6, and task B doesn't have to be started until time 1. So task B is the task that has to be started first, and so that's the task that limits us regarding task A. Whenever we're doing a backward pass and we have a choice between multiple different tasks in order to choose their late start time as the next task's late finish time, like this task A is looking at task B, C, and D, we will always choose the earliest late start time. So the late start time that has the lowest number there. In this case, it's task B. Task B must be started at time 1, so task A must finish at time 1. 1 minus 1 is 0. Task A must start at time 0, must start immediately at the beginning of the project time. Okay, now you have all of the same numbers that I do for my early start, early finish, late start, and late finish times. Next, we're going to calculate slack times. Now, I'm not going to remind you here what slack is. I'm going to have you see if you can remember what slack is and calculate it. So pause the video for a minute and then see if you can calculate the slack. Does it help if I remind you that slack is the difference between the early and the late times? For slack, we can either take the late start minus the early start time, or we can take the late finish minus the early finish time. Either way will give us the exact same number for slack. So let's do it for each of these activities. So for activity A, 1 minus 1 is 0, or 0 minus 0 is 0. Either way, we find that the slack is 0. For task B, again, we're taking the late finish minus the early finish times, or the late start minus the early start times. Either one will work. So 5 minus 5 is 0. 1 minus 1 is 0. So you can see for these two activities, there is no slack. What that indicates is that those tasks must be completed on time. They cannot be delayed at all. They must be completed sequentially with no delay. Next, task C, 9 minus 4 is 5, or 6 minus 1 is 5. So C has a slack of 5. What this means is that C can be delayed up to 5 time periods, up to 5 days or 5 weeks, whatever the time frame is that we're looking for here with duration. It can be delayed up to 5, and the project still can be completed on time. We have that much extra time here with task C. Again, taking the late finish minus the early finish times and the late start minus the early start times. 9 minus 8 is 1. 2 minus 1 is 1. Task D has a slack of 1. For task E, 11 minus 11 is 0. 5 minus 5 is 0. Task E has a slack of 0. For task F, 11 minus 10 is 1. 9 minus 8 is 1. Task F has a slack of 1. For task G, 18 minus 18 is 0. 11 minus 11 is 0. Task G has a slack of 0. For activity H, 18 minus 17 is 1. 9 minus 8 is 1. Activity H has a slack of 1. Finally, for task I, 22 minus 22 equals 0. 18 minus 18 is 0. So task I has a slack of 0. Next, by looking at the diagram or by looking at the slack, you tell me what is the critical path. So pause the video and see if you can determine the critical path. So the critical path is task A, B, E, G, I. It follows the path through the project that starts at A, then goes to B, then E, then G, then I. Now, all of the tasks or all of these activities must be finished for the project to be completed, but it's just that tasks C, D, F, and H all have some slack, which means they can encounter some delays. The path A, B, E, G, I must be completed without any errors and without any delays in order for the project to be completed on time. Any delays in this critical path will delay the entire project. So this is the project that the project manager will pay very close attention to. So I hope that this review was helpful for you to walk through again all of the different calculations that will be required on exam 2. As a reminder, at the conclusion of this video, at the end of this video, I will be tacking on some very detailed information about how to do well on these exams. This is advice that I gave during the exam 1 review, but I'm just going to repeat it here so that if you missed it, for instance, on exam 1, you can get it again, or if you'd just like a refresher on it, you can hear it again. I will give you several resources and strategies for studying that have been found to be very helpful for students. As a reminder, any information, any resources that you need off of Blackboard, you should download those now so that you will have access to them during the exam. During the exam testing period, Blackboard content will be removed so that the only content available on Blackboard is the exam content. So now keep watching the video for more detailed exam advice. So how about some advice for studying for the exams? And this advice comes from suggestions from many students over the past several semesters who have given us ideas about how they have performed well in the class. Now, I guess, tongue-in-cheek, the first bullet point here, what is the worst way to study for the exam? Now, this has been proven in research on college students that the absolute worst way to study for an exam is to sit down with your notes and read them over and over and over and over and over, hoping that just by reading your notes, you will somehow be able to remember them when you come in on the exam. That has been shown scientifically to be the worst way to study for an exam. It does not help students to recall information as well as other methods that are a lot more powerful. So what are some of the best ways to study for an exam? So there's several here, and these techniques have also been proven in research on college students to help students perform very well on exams. So one is to rewrite your notes, but not just copying your notes. Don't just take your notes and copy them or take the PowerPoints and write the words out that's already printed out on the page. Take a look at your notes and then rewrite your notes, but rewrite it in your own words and try to explain it as if you were explaining it to someone else. Now that takes a little bit more effort, but by doing that, you're going to actually encode that information into your brain, making it much more likely that you'll be able to recall it. Another thing you can do, which many of our students do, is to create a topic outline of all your notes. This will give you good main ideas about the material, how the material fits together, the different parts of the material that interact with one another. This will really help you as well on those computational questions where we're looking for supply chain management relationships and concept type questions. By creating a course outline or a topic outline, it's going to really help you to understand how those topics mesh together. You can also create your own sample exam questions. Now, on the previous slide, as I was talking with you, I told you what types of questions are going to be on the exam, gave you examples of each of those exam problem types, and you could actually go through your notes, go through the PowerPoint slides, and you could actually create for each exam, for this exam and for the other exams, you could create dozens of different exam questions that could potentially come from those slides. And chances are you're going to have a lot of those exam questions that are actually on the exam. And so this is a great way you can use those sample exam questions within a study group. Now, research has also shown that students that join a study group tend to do better on exams than students who don't. Now, realize that there are personality-wise, there are some students who prefer to study by themselves, but I will encourage all students for part of your study time to join a study group. And here's kind of how that would work. You would get together with a group of fellow students taking the class. You would print out all of the practice problems without the answers that we have provided on Blackboard, then cut those into strips so that there's just one practice problem on each page. Then for instance, assign certain lectures to each one of the study group members where they would create exam questions based upon that particular lecture. You'd bring all of those problems and questions together, one question on each page, put them in the middle of the table, shuffle them all up, pull out one question at random, and then try to figure out the answer to that question as a group. By pulling out the questions at random, you will actually mimic the way that the exam will appear to you, because the exam will be giving you questions in a random order as well. So you'll be able to mimic what it would be like on the exam, with exam questions that are likely to be actually on the exam. And of course, it's our intention that you would be able to practice math problems using the practice problems. Do not look at the solutions. Really try to solve those math problems using only the formulas that are given on the exam review sheet, and practice those math problems. Practice them and keep practicing them until you feel very confident with those math problems. It's our intention as instructors and with the exam that those math problems should be very easy to you. You should have practiced them enough to where that should be sort of the sure thing on the exam, the thing that you feel very confident about that you would be able to get correct, because they are definitely going to be on the exam, and the format that they're going to be there has already been given to you. Now, there are some things that you will probably want to be memorizing, for instance, definitions of terms or lists of particular items. And to do that, you're going to want to use an effective memory technique. Keep in mind, just reading the lists or reading your notes over and over again is not an effective technique for memorization. But there are several different techniques that are available. So one is to create an acronym. Now, many of you have done this before, where you have created an acronym for the terms that are in a list. And so you could do this, creating your own acronym. There are also several very powerful memory systems. And the names of some of them, some of my favorites are the link and story methods, the number or rhyme mnemonic methods, or the room and room system. You can certainly look up those methods on Wikipedia, and Wikipedia will tell you how to use those things, sort of teach you how to use those things. There's also a website called www.mindtools.com, and they provide guidance, and they provide little online courses for each one of these techniques. Learning these techniques will help you in all of your classes. So there is no one at Bauer who gets any sort of kickback or any sort of compensation from www.mindtools.com. It's just that is a website that has been around for quite a while and does a good job of teaching these memory techniques. And it might be something that is that's interesting to many of you to go out and try to use. And as I mentioned, using these memory techniques should help you not only in this class, but will also help you in all of your other classes that you take at Bauer. So here's how it works. You go to www.mindtools.com. You will click on the toolkit link. which will pull down this pull-down menu of categories. You will then click on the Learning Skills category. Then you will click on the Memory Techniques link. And finally, you will click on the article that you are interested in. I mentioned to you that I like the number and rhyme mnemonic technique. I like the Roman room system, and I like the link and story methods, although there are several different articles there. I have contacted www.mindtools.com, and they confirmed to me that the first 3 articles that you open are free. After that, you can sign up for a subscription with their website. They offer the first month for $1, and there are thousands of different articles that are available here to help you with your studying and help you be able to absorb classroom material better. And if you do subscribe, they do offer a 25% student discount. You can either email them for that discount, or they mentioned to me that if you just sign up with a .edu email address, they will give you the discount automatically. Now, you do not have to subscribe to their website. Like I said, the first 3 articles are free. I've given you 3 suggestions of ones that I would look at first. Then, of course, their first month is very inexpensive, just $1. So you would have access to quite a few of those articles and resources if you wanted more than that. Of course, any of these techniques you could also look up on Wikipedia, or just do a Google search and learn about them there as well. You can definitely just use this website as a resource to find topic titles that you could then search for on the internet. So where can you find the content for the exam? Where can you find potential exam questions? So I'll try to give you some guidance here. Your first resource is going to be the exam review sheet. So on the exam review sheet, if you'll skip over to the second page of the review sheet, it lists out all of the topics that are tested on the exam. So it will give the section of the textbook, the title of the section of the textbook that is covered. It also will list sections of the textbook that are not covered on the exam, so that you can avoid studying those sections. It will also tell you, we've been mentioning during the class, that some of the class material is not listed in the textbook. It's material that the professors here in the supply chain management program at Bauer are familiar with. It's supply chain topics that real companies today are dealing with that just isn't covered in the textbook, and so we cover those in class to make sure that you have coverage of those. Any of those are listed in this section as well. So I guess the first thing you should look at is what types of questions will be on the exam. Now, you already know there will be conceptual questions and computational questions. So let's look at each of those. First, the computational, or the math type questions. If there is a math-based question that is on the exam, you can be assured that your professor has completed at least one example of each of those types of questions during class. Today, during this review, I will also be going through additional examples of each of these so that you'll have them. In the practice problems section of Blackboard, there are lots of practice examples, and these are listed as questions that are structured very similarly to what you'll see on the exam, as well as solutions for all of those, so that you have the solutions as well. Then, of course, you are welcome to make up your own potential computational math questions, and you could use these to quiz friends, for instance, in a study group, just by changing the wording and the numbers of some of the problems that you see in the practice problems, or the problems that you see me complete today in this video. So what sorts of questions will be asked as a conceptual question? There's typically a few different types of questions, categories of questions that fit here. One is definitions of terms. So anytime that you see a definition of a term that is posted on one of the PowerPoint slides that we presented during class, where it lists the term and then has a colon or something similar to that and then defines that term, that is definitely a possibility for an exam question. There's a couple of different ways that we will typically word those questions. One would be the best definition for whatever that term is, and then it would list several different definitions, and you would have to pick the best definition. Another way of structuring that question would be the term that is most closely associated with, and then it would list the definition is, and then it would list several different terms. You would have to pick the term that matches to that definition. There's also several lists of items that you'll see in the PowerPoint slides. So as we're going through the PowerPoints, as you go back through your notes, the PowerPoint slides that we presented in class, many of the slides will have a category of knowledge about supply chain, and then it will list several different terms or several different principles or several different characteristics about that particular term, and those will be listed as bullet points underneath the main item. Those are lists of items, and these are also very easy for us to test. This is very similar to many of your classes. Many of your professors will do this same thing. A couple of ways we will answer this is by, or ask these type questions would be, this particular supply chain management principle includes all of the following characteristics except, and then we would list all of the different characteristics, but then we would add in one that really isn't a characteristic of that. And then another way of wording it would be to say which one of the following is included within this particular principle, where we would list the main idea, and then we would list one of the things that applies to that along with several detractors, and you would have to pick the correct one. There's also just supply chain management organization of ideas. One of the major ones that we talk about all the way through the course is the idea that we think of supply chain as plan, buy, make, and deliver, and then return. And so those sorts of organization of ideas, how different principles within supply chain are connected to one another, how managers deal with supply chain management ideas or concepts, or how they make decisions. Those are ideas that could be used as a conceptual question as well. Those are things that were covered during our class sessions together, and most likely your instructor gave some sort of an example about how supply chain management works during class that would have explained those items. So how to study for these types of questions that are going to be on the exam. We need to let you know, exam questions will come directly from your class notes, directly from the PowerPoint slides. When we take exam questions from the PowerPoint slides, we will not change the wording that is used on the PowerPoint slide. We don't want to confuse you. We want to be able to test whether or not you understand those concepts. Those are most likely going to be definitions of terms or particular lists of items. There will be some exam questions that come directly from things that your professor has discussed with you in the class, giving you examples of different things, talking with you about how supply chain management works and how supply chain managers make decisions. And those exam questions will come directly from the class discussions. There are also exam questions for the computational or math questions that come directly from the practice problems. So those are things that you should certainly spend most of your time studying. Now, the textbook that we use for this class is used to support the material for the class. But of course, the textbook does not include all the things that we talk about in the class. And there's a lot that's in the textbook that we don't talk about in class. You have already been tested on your general familiarity with the textbook by using the quizzes and the GLMs. We will not be pulling obscure information out of the textbook to create exam questions. So you do not need to memorize textbook material to do well on the exam. If you study directly from your class notes, the notes that you've written down from what the instructor has been talking with you about during class, and completed practice problems, then you will be well prepared to be able to perform very well on this exam. If you have not yet made an appointment with CASA, you should go to the CASA website, which is shown here, or you can go directly to their office and ask how to sign up for an appointment with CASA to be able to take your exam. Now, our exams this semester are spread over several days to be able to accommodate the large number of students that will be taking the exam. There are enough time slots available during those days to accommodate all of the students in our class. However, there are not enough time slots for all of you to be able to take your exam, for instance, on the last day that is available. So at this point, if you have not yet made an appointment with CASA, then you will just be limited to the time slots that they have remaining, and you'll have to choose one of those. Those dates have been in the class schedule since the beginning of the semester, and we have maintain those dates the entire time. So you've had those available, and we mentioned at the beginning of the course that those are dates that you should plan to have flexibility or clear out time to be able to take your exam. So make your appointment with CASA if you haven't already done so. The next thing that I'm going to ask you to do is to print your appointment confirmation. I have had several students in the past that have missed their exam because they either have the wrong date or the wrong time written down for their confirmation. And so you need to go to the CASA website, make sure that you know what day and what time. Don't just trust that you signed up for the correct one. Make sure that CASA has a confirmation that you have signed up for that particular day and that particular time. You do not want to show up at CASA and have them turn you away because they don't have you on their list. The sections of the book and the course content that is being tested is listed on the exam review sheet. We'll go through that in a few minutes, and so you should have those available. Any content that you need from Blackboard, so that would be class slides, PowerPoint slides, practice problems, any other resources that are on Blackboard that you would like available offline while you study for the exam, you need to download those now so that you have those available. Download them onto your computer, onto a USB drive. The Blackboard content will be removed and disabled prior to and during the exam testing sessions. This is to provide some consistency and some equity among the testing conditions for all of the different students. It also gives us a little bit of control over academic honesty issues. Additionally, the assistants and instructors will not be available to answer questions once the exam has begun. This is one way that we're able to establish some equity among all of the different students so that students, for instance, taking the exam at a later date don't necessarily have more access to assistants and instructors than students taking the exam earlier. So if you have questions about your studying, about the material, about practice problems, or would like some help with that, make sure that you see the assistants or your instructor sometime prior to when the exam sessions begin. Also, because most of Blackboard functionality will be disabled during that exam testing session, make sure that you can log into MyOMLab by going directly to the Pearson website. So I've provided that link here, and I'll have a slide coming up in a minute that will give you some instructions about how to log on there. You want to practice logging on directly through the MyOMLab site now, so that you can confidently do that during the testing session. Now, on your scheduled exam day, you should arrive, we are recommending that you arrive at the University of Houston at least 1 hour early. Now, my suggestion personally to you is that you arrive several hours early, and this is to avoid traffic issues or unforeseen delays like a fender bender or a flat tire or car trouble. By leaving early enough to get to the University of Houston at least 1 hour or several hours early, then you'll be able to make contingency plans if some of these things happen, get alternative transportation, and be able to still make it to your CASA appointment. You should be here in time so that you can check into CASA 20 minutes prior to your exam time. That is their preferred method, is checking into CASA 20 minutes prior to your exam time. You will need a photo ID card. The UH student ID is the preferred ID card that is required for your check-in. And if you haven't taken an exam at CASA before, I'll just let you know that CASA is very strict on when exams begin, and so they will not allow or they will not permit admission to the exam if you are late. So you definitely want to be early to that exam. Students in the past have been just a few minutes late to their exam session, and because CASA stacks these exams back to back to back, make sure that they have testing seats available for all the students, they do not permit late admission to an exam session. And then once you're in the exam, you may click on the exam within Blackboard and you'll be allowed to take the exam at that point. Please note that exam grades will be posted on Blackboard only after all students have taken the exam. So once you complete the exam, you'll click that you save all of your answers. It will submit your exam at that point, but your grade will not be available until all the students have taken the exam, which will probably be sometime the following week.